As journalists and television hosts, scripts are a lifeline. Each newscast, each story, it all revolves around a script.
But now it's time to go unscripted. That means we're not just going off script, we're throwing out the script altogether.
Each week, we're joined by fellow Farm Journal hosts and editors to peel back the layers on stories we've shared throughout the week.
Unscripted. It's real, it's raw, it's entertaining, and it's your chance to meet the personalities behind the personalities. I'm Tyne Morgan.
And I'm Clinton Griffiths. Welcome to Unscripted.
Tyne, do you feel like you've just been put through a ringer this week? It's just been wild and crazy.
You know, it was actually a guy from Bloomberg posted on social media. He goes, I feel like it's election night without the pizza. And I thought that was such a good comparison because as you look at all that, I mean, we knew this week Clinton was going to be a busy week. We knew the potential for some explosive market reaction. The acreage report was kind of like, grain stocks was, And so, you know, there wasn't as much reaction as we thought then. And then on Wednesday, even though we had been warned about this for an entire month, the market said, hold my beer. You're in for a wild ride. That is what the market said Wednesday night, Thursday morning. And as we set today, trying to navigate it all.
Yeah, I brought my little cup of coffee. I think almost a whole pot will fit in here after we just try to keep up with what's going on. In fact,
okay, wait, hold that back up, please. Hold that back up.
Oh, hold on. Let me turn it around.
Clinton's.
Let me just turn it around
Clinton's
there.
Cup of coffee. My cup of coffee. Okay,
You're doing it wrong. That's the problem.
But I am a BYOC person to the office.
Okay. Bring your own coffee.
Me
don't.
Too.
Yeah, I'm not.
I
don't need that warm brown water, as our friend Theo Vaughn used to say. You know, at Tyne, we've been trying to figure out who we should invite to talk to us today to try to sort through all of this. In fact, I think someone snapped a picture of you looking at the list of potential. Yeah, that's it. The potential candidates. Here you are with the list of people that we could have.
That is me
on today.
At any restaurant you take me to, looking at the dessert menu, but always picking creme brulee. That's my jam right now is creme brulee. No matter what the long list is you give me, that's my go-to. And for you, Clinton, that's like going to a microbrewery, right?
Well, yeah. Or it's like, hey, look at this list of bourbons we have. And I'm like, I don't know. You pick. I've got no idea.
Just give me a Busch Latte.
Yeah, I'll just take the Busch Latte. All right, let's bring in our guest who's going to help us sort through all of this. He's the Director of Research at the Bespoke Group. It's Jacob Shapiro. Jacob, thank you so much for being here. A resident of New Orleans, and he and I shared a stage at the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo this year, and I just really enjoyed the conversation and the insights that Jacob was able to bring to us. Jacob, thank you for being with us on Unscripted.
Nice to be with y'all. Thanks for having me.
So are you from New Orleans, Jacob? Like, let's have some background here because I don't talk to a lot of people that are based in Nolens.
Well, it is the most geopolitical city in the United States. If you have no New Orleans, you have no U.S. exports out through the Mississippi. But no, I grew up in a small farm an hour east of Atlanta, bumbled around the world, was hanging out in Austin, Texas when my wife found me and took me back to her hometown. So my wife is from here, and that's why I'm
here. He comes by it honestly. And your favorite New Orleans cuisine, if you're going to pick something, because I think the city does it well.
I don't know that I can pick favorite cuisine, but if you're ever in town, my favorite restaurant right now is Herb Saint. It's the flagship for the Donald Link Restaurant Group. Get a reservation. You usually need a reservation like a week or two ahead of time, but Herb Saint never misses.
Okay, and I take it it's worth it. If I'm going to go there, what dish am I ordering, Jacob?
So they have a bunch of different things, but make sure there's an appetizer, sort of Cajun Alfredo that has a deep fried egg on top of it with some bacon. Like, make sure you get that appetizer.
Okay.
My favorite dish on the menu is the duck confit, which is like really, it's like a Cajun with some like dirty rice underneath it, but you really can't go wrong. Everything on the menu slaps, but do make sure you get the pasta.
You had me at deep fried. Just so you know.
That's exactly right. Jacob, I know you've been doing a lot of speaking around the country this year, talking to a lot of farm groups, even though, you know, kind of your day job, it works with a kind of a different group, but it takes you back to your roots and you're really able to build some connection there. give us a little bit of an idea of some of the things that you like to talk about when you're out speaking.
Yeah, it's funny that there's actually a fairly large delta between the things I'm doing on a daily basis and what I'm speaking about generally. And I think it makes me a better analyst for it. So my day job is I'm director of research at a firm that is helping families manage their wealth. So we're making investment decisions. We're thinking about trusts. We're thinking about whether there are offshore structures or philanthropic things that we need to do in order to achieve family goals. So I'm director of research. So you might have an investor at our team come and say, Jacob, tell us about what the market is like in Brazil because we're thinking about buying some Brazilian equities. Or Jacob, tell us what the heck is going on with tariffs so we can get a macro point of view so that we can position accordingly or think about the right currencies that we want to be allocated to. Then, when it comes to my speaking engagements, it depends on what the audience wants. So some audiences just want me to talk about the world. Some audiences want me to tie direct links between what's going on in the world and what is interesting to their audience in particular. With farmers, farmers are big exporters. Like the U.S. is the most agriculturally blessed country in the entire world. And for 100+ years, U.S. agriculture has been all about exporting surplus abroad. So when you get the decline of U.S. relative power to some other countries in the world and rising protectionism and the threat of tariffs. And this started under the Obama administration. Like Trump has brought it to a crescendo, but it's not exclusive to him. You get, farmers who are really concerned about what the future looks like because they're talking about changes that haven't happened in their lifetimes that we have to go generations back to understand. And I think one of the things that makes me a better analyst with these things and which helps me be apolitical is that, in the research that I'm doing at my day job, the market tells me whether I'm right or not. Like ultimately, I care about the trade. I care about whether I made money for my client. Political ideology, all those other sorts of things. I'll sit with you and order the creme brulee and the bourbon together, and we could talk about political ideology. But I ultimately don't care about that stuff. I care about, okay, are the things that I'm talking about, are these insights creating actual tangible value for my clients, whether it's their investments, whether it's their strategic decisions about the future. And that's where the marriage of those two things comes together.
Okay, Jacob. So let's get into the tariffs a little bit, because as we saw the president announce, the list of tariffs on Thursday, it wasn't a surprise. We've been warned about it for a month that this was going to be tariff day. And then somehow it transitioned into Liberation Day. And that's what we called it. And even a happy Liberation Day posted on social media. But, as you look at the list, there was a lot of concern from some of our top trading partners, including Canada, including Mexico. Was this a best case scenario that Trump announced when it comes to the impact on ag, or do you think it's more worst case?
Yeah, there's a couple things to pull apart there. The first thing, and you guys are in the media environment, so you know this, but President Trump is extremely good at keeping himself at the center of attention. And he has used this tariff thing to keep himself in front of the headlines for literally months. I think it was actually kind of a surprise because we've had warnings of tariffs for the last 2, 3, 4 months. Like how many times has he threatened to really take out the tariff bazooka? And at the last second, he always stopped. So I think people thought, hey, maybe he's the boy who cried tariff. Maybe he's going to pull back again and he's not going to push forward. And it seems at least like he's pushing forward. Now, that said, how quick until we get exemptions? How quick until we get, we made a deal with Japan. They did something for us. We're going to take those off. I think a lot of those deals are probably going to come in quick succession. But I don't blame people for being surprised by this because the Trump administration has been fairly mercurial about this. I think one thing we also learned is that there's no grand strategy here behind this. There's the way that they calculated these tariffs, they basically just took the trade deficit that the United States runs with that country and divided it by the exports, and then Trump in his generosity cut that figure in half and said, okay, now you have a tariff rate, which doesn't even really sort of make that much sense. I will say, and I said this when I met Clinton in Fargo, I didn't think that he was going to push forward on Canada and Mexico. I thought that the Canada-Mexico tariffs were a different bucket, that was part of a USMCA renegotiation that I thought would eventually happen. And they are not, you didn't get increases on Canada and Mexico. So now you're just bringing everybody else up to where Canada and Mexico was. But whether it's South Korea or Japan or the EU or Israel, all these different countries are sort of scratching their heads thinking, why are we getting targeted here? Some of these countries went out of their way in the last couple of weeks to try and make Trump, placate Trump and say, no, we're doing whatever you want. We don't want to have these issues with you in general. So I think for those nations and for everybody else, it's not bad to be surprised.
Tyne, I think let's transition this into talking tea, and then let's just talk about Jacob next. What happens next?
Okay.
Well, what happens next? There's there's two broad scenarios. The first is that this has always been about renegotiating trade deals, and that in quick succession, we will get exemptions or he'll pull back some of these tariffs, and it won't really be as doomsday as we think it is. And honestly, that is my base case scenario, because behind door number two is a big spike in inflation really, really quickly, probably followed by a deflationary spiral. And we'll start getting into stagflation, that word that President Trump pretended that he didn't know in an interview earlier this week. I don't see any other way that this works out. My out there sort of not black swan, but gray swan scenario is that Congress wakes up and discovers its testicular fortitude and says, actually, the Constitution gives us power over these things. We are going to take this power back, Mr. Executive, because the Democrats obviously want to stick it to Trump. And many Republicans who are thinking about the midterms have to be looking at the potential impact of these tariffs if they stay on in this manner and say, this is going to kill me. There is no way that I'm going to make it through the midterms if you're going to get a big stepwise increase in inflation. Remember, Joe Biden lost the election, lost his position, not because he was an old doddering guy in an interview. It was because inflation spiked. Americans do not like inflation. And I still think, like, Vice President Vance or Lutnick or President Trump himself going out there and saying, hey, you're going to experience some short-term pain for long-term success. Has that ever worked in American politics? Like, you're going to get snapped back so hard, you're not even going to be able to realize it. So my base case scenario is, okay, a lot of volatility. You've made some waves in general, but you're going to make deals. And I think the worst case scenario is actually he means all this. And he actually believes this nonsense about, oh, tariffs are going to make the United States extremely strong and everything is going to be fine. And if you get there, like I said, I think it's probably a sharp inflationary spike followed by a deflationary spiral, and things will get ugly very quickly.
We will be right back after a word from our sponsor.
We can't control the weather. We can't affect the global demand for corn and soy. We can't even fix that piece of equipment you swear is still good if you just have the right part. But BASF can offer you 0% financing on our proven, consistent performing fungicides. Our grower finance program is here to help you maximize your yield potential and savings with 0% APR on some of the highest performing fungicides available until March 15th, 2025. Because now more than ever, every dollar counts, and you can't beat 0% financing on innovative corn and soybean fungicides like Revitech fungicide, Revilock fungicide, and Veltima fungicide. Keep more in your wallet while improving your yield potential. Talk to your BASF retailer today about the Grower Finance Program to lock in 0% APR. Subject to credit approval, terms, and conditions. See BASF Grower Finance Program for details. Always read and follow label directions.
I have a follow-up, but let's go to our next segment, Talking Tea. All right, Jacob, I had a farmer text me yesterday and say, Tyne, if tariffs are so bad, then why does every other country use them? What would you say to that, Jacob?
Tariffs are not inherently bad. They can actually be an incredibly useful tool if you know what you're doing. But like any surgical instrument, like a scalpel, for example, incredibly useful surgical tool. We couldn't do modern medicine without scalpels. But if you took a scalpel to my jugular right now and sliced it, that probably wouldn't be good for me. Things would not go particularly well. So tariffs are the same thing. They're a surgical instrument. I think you can make a good case that there are particular sectors where it would be very smart to put tariffs on. One that I've been talking about lately is tariffs on things like quote unquote used cooking oil from China.
Yep.
Or some of these others that have been eating up the market share that American, soybean and corn farmers thought was going to go for renewable diesel and things like that. If you slap tariffs on that, also Canada and its canola, by the way, that would make a lot of sense. You want to keep those products from being dumped into the American market so the American farmer who has planted these things as part of a renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel sort of future can get the value that they think they're going to accrue. So that makes some sense. At a broader scale, if you're thinking about, okay, the U.S. manufacturing complex has atrophied, it absolutely has. We make something like 12 to 15% of the products that are made in the world. China makes something like 35%. China is the manufacturing superpower in the world. We don't make ships. We don't make medicine. We don't make the contact lenses that I'm wearing. We import all of these things in general. And if you're thinking about a world that is more competitive, that is fraught with geopolitical risk, yes, you probably want those supply chains to be in the United States, or at least in countries that are close to the United States that you control. The problem is if you just use tariffs, you're not going to do anything because, as I said, we haven't made things in this country for over a generation, arguably 2 or 3 generations. So if you're going to do tariffs, you also have to support the domestic economy and the domestic companies that haven't done this for 20 or 30 years. So that means helping them rebuild infrastructure, tax breaks so that they can invest in the capex that they need to actually do these things, retraining workers so that they know what the heck to do when they get into the factory to make these things, and not so that it's, you're competing after a very small number of workers. Also probably need to figure out immigration law reform immediately, because we're going to need legal immigration in this country to fill a lot of these different low-end positions that no American is going to want to fill too. So tariffs by themselves, if it's part of a broader push to sort of a manufacturing renaissance that the Trump administration talks about, great, makes total sense. But they're only doing one hand of it. They're protecting the U.S. economy, while at the same time, Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and everybody else is running around slashing government and saying, no, we need less government spending. We need to be fiscally conservative. You can't have a manufacturing renaissance and be fiscally conservative. You need to take out the checkbook and say, okay, like we're going to spend the money now so that 5-10 years down the road, we can make things, and we're going to protect American companies so that they can do that in a way that makes sense. So my big problem here with the policy, or why I would tell you that it's faulted policy, it's not because tariff is a dirty word. It's because the tactics have not caught up with the strategy. I think the strategy, you can make a good faith argument, is the right one in a geopolitically fraught world, but the tactics don't line up with what the stated strategic goals are, and so it's not going to go well in that case.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's interesting. And what do you think the chances are, Jacob, as we look at this, that we do see some relief on tariff pressure from other countries? Is in my own experience, in just traveling to Europe and different places, and asking them about ag imports from the U.S. It's just, beef in particular, let's say, to Spain or somewhere else. A lot of it is like, no, we just don't take it. Or there's such an incredible tariff on it that it's just not competitive there. What do you think the chances are of us actually being able to soften some of those tariffs through this measure?
We will probably soften some of them, but will also sort of create suspicion in countries that will say, oh, yeah, we couldn't depend on the United States the entire time. And if those countries can get that product from an alternate source, they will. So China's the great example for this. China has gone from importing most, soybeans and corn. They still import some from the United States, and they will add loads when they want to make the U.S. government happy. But Brazil's the low-cost producer now. So it doesn't really matter. The writing is on the wall for the U.S. corn and soybean farmer. If you're thinking you're going to export to China in the future, you're not. It's just not going to happen. If you can get a few loads in the next couple of years, by all means, take the money and run. But it's not a sustainable strategy in the long term because Brazil is there. For the American wheat farmer, it's sort of a similar story. For beef, there are plenty of competitors. I was in California a couple of weeks ago talking to some almond growers. They're in a good place because the United States has 77% market share. And if you want almonds, it's pretty hard to spin that up in just a year. So no matter what the tariffs are, if there's demand for almonds, whether it's in India or other parts of the world, you're going to import from the United States. They're the only game in town. But talking about some of these other things where we aren't the low cost producer already, and we're giving political rationale to either create protected environments in those countries so they become more self-sufficient, or define alternative markets to the United States, that's what's going to happen. So I think you will find that in some countries, like say Japan, countries that are particularly dependent on the United States, or Canada even, you might get more market access than you've ever gotten before. And the tariffs will be successful in opening up those markets. But at what cost, and what other lost opportunities from no longer trust you are you going to create by using tariffs in this heavy-handed sort of manner? So just careful what you wish for, I guess. And it really depends, what commodity are we talking about? As I said, for corn and soybean farmers, the writing is on the wall for exports. I think wheat is coming next. If you're in one of these specialty crops, or if you're in one of these things, a specialized product that they can't get somewhere else, maybe you have a little bit more coverage from that. So it just kind of depends there.
Well, Jacob, the bigger problem here, and you mentioned it, is we are not the low-cost producer the majority of the time. You look at Brazil, and we know their land costs are a little cheaper, and there's reasons. There's farmers here that are frustrated that while they had to pay tech fees on some of this seed, it was basically given to South America, and they have a competitive edge. And so there's a lot of frustration with farmers. But Jacob, how do we become a lower cost producer? Is there anything we can do when it comes to regulation? Do you think that's the bigger issue here, is no matter what happens with tariffs, no matter what happens, we can't be competitive if we are the high cost producer to begin with, and our goods just cost more.
This goes to whether we trust the market to work itself out or not. So if we don't trust the market and we're going to try to manipulate ourselves into being the quote unquote low cost producer, we're no longer in a market driven economy anymore. And arguably with the imposition of tariffs, we're moving away from a market driven economy. But I'll answer that with what I've been saying to a lot of different groups over the past couple of months, which is there was a silver lining to the inflation spike in the United States in 2022 and 2023, which is we saw that the U.S. consumer can afford it. The U.S. Constitution does not say that the U.S. consumer is entitled to life, liberty, and cheap food. So the United States consumer has gotten used to really, really cheap food. And if you make food that is, according to RFK Jr., better for you, or if you make food that is organic, or if it's local and all these other sorts of things, you will find people who will buy it if it's good quality. And it's the last thing that people are going to cut spending on because people want to put food on the table. So I think that the answer here for the United States is we've been thinking about exporting for over 100 years with good reason, but the world is changing around us and we do have competitors and we've gotten really complacent about providing food to our own market. The average food insecurity rate in the United States, which, as I said, the most agriculturally blessed country in the world, nobody should be going hungry in this country, is somewhere around 10.4%. So if you're thinking about what is my next biggest export market in this geopolitical world that is emerging, it's the United States. Like we've got plenty of low-hanging fruit here that you can sell to, whether that is, in the interior of the country where you're going to sell some of those bulk commodities, whether it's figure out how to sell a $15 loaf of sourdough bread to a Brooklyn hipster and make that replicable. Like there's all sorts of opportunities that are out there. When I was talking to some dairy farmers a couple of weeks ago, look at what Coca-Cola of all companies has done with Fairlife. Why was it not a U.S. dairy farmer that figured out some process that strips out sugar and increases protein and then makes billions of dollars off of like selling some kind of health-focused marketed milk drink to the consumers? Why is it Coca-Cola that's the one figuring that out? So I think there are opportunities here in the United States and that the market is telling you what President Trump said in that State of the Union sort of speech that he said, hey, we should be thinking about the domestic market. Now, the downside is the U.S. government has at least not expressed a willingness to step in and help you do that. Because to do that, you need better infrastructure because most of our infrastructure points to exports, not to getting things into local markets. You might need some help when it comes to things like crop insurance or heck, maybe even a farm bill, like some degree of predictability from the U.S. government from a policy perspective to make the investment and to take the risk to do this thing, which is a major change that is going forward. So I sympathize with U.S. farmers, and I especially sympathize with the sort of smaller to medium-sized farmer because the environment that we're creating here is one that only large farms that scale up can really survive in because they're the ones that can survive the winds of change. And we're not supporting that small, medium-sized farmer who is going to have to make major changes if they're going to survive in a world, to your point, where we're not going to be the low-cost producer and we're not going back. There's no way to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Tyne. When we talked to Greg Dowd a few weeks ago, he talked and he's on this mission to say, at some point the U.S. needs to export the products we make here, not just the raw goods, whether it be ethanol, whether it be milk or, whey or powder. For him, he was saying, we are really good at making protein and pick it out. Either it's, meat protein or dairy protein or cheese or whatever. He goes, we should own the world as far as exports of protein, and that's probably our method forward. I thought, what, maybe it's a different way to look at it here.
But that's not what the president's saying, right? I mean, the president's saying, have fun because we're going to use a lot more of our products domestic. So that's kind of where I'm confused right now is on one hand, you have this, we're going to use a lot more of our products domestically. And then there's a question. I mean, Jacob, you brought it up is can we actually do that? That is the goal. And then there's this other crowd saying we need more exports, more exports, more exports. And so, Jacob, that's where I'm confused in all of this.
Yeah, and my message for literally since early in the Biden administration was exports is not the future. The U.S. government is not going to be there to support exports, even though all these trade groups have gotten used to telling you that. You need to be thinking a little bit differently in terms of what your end markets are, because you're exactly right. Like, it's one thing to say, like, okay, we're going to be the exporter of protein, but how are you going to support the American farmer to do that? Like, what things is he going to have to, or is he or she going to have to do to make that sort of competitive from that basis? And I just don't see that that's exactly what is happening. So I'm not saying that we're not going to export anything. And I actually think Greg is exactly right. The more you can ascend the value chain, the more that maybe you can sell some of these things abroad. But I think we've been neglecting the domestic market to our own detriment. And if you can get some more diversification between domestic and between international, then things would probably get, not get a little bit better, but at least we would get to a more harmonious situation. Because right now we're balanced towards exports in a world where we're becoming less competitive. And just saying export more or buy our stuff or we're going to tariff you, okay, like maybe you get a short-term bump, but like it's not going to be sustainable in the long run.
Jacob, you connect that a lot of times in your talks to maybe this Make America Healthy Again movement and kind of some perspective on RFK, and that, you know, maybe there is an opportunity for American farmers rather than something to run from. Talk a little bit about that and how you see that as an opportunity for our growers.
Well, I think American tastes are always changing. So it's trite for me to say, oh, American tastes are changing. Like you need to roll with the times. But I do think the data shows us pretty clearly that millennials and Gen Z are spending more of their dollars on things that they think are healthier than previous generations. And even though they're, you know, at an earlier stage of their income generating cycle, a greater share of their wealth is going towards sleep or better nutrition or some of these other things. So if you can sell products that are healthier, I think you're going to find that you will have consumers that will want to buy them. So whether that's locally sourced bread and dairy products, whether that is I saw that one half of Outcast is working with Sunrise Flour Mill in Minnesota for some kind of waffle mix based on heritage grains. You start like digging underneath the surface. Like there's a market for some of these things, and if you can market yourself as somebody as a product that is going to be a healthier option for someone, you might be able to move it forward. But that gets us into a difficult place with RFK Jr. because I think 85% of the things that he says, I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. Like that could actually really help. But 15% is, pardon my French, batshit insane, and like is going to kill us. Like his advice about the measles and things like that is literally going to lead to people dying. Leaving aside, his whole thing about seed oils. There's no proof that seed oils are bad. You want Steak and Shake to do beef tallow instead of sunflower oil. Sunflower oil is like relatively healthy. That's one thing I've been telling the sunflower guys. Like you have a health argument. If you could get some Gen Z influencer to go on TikTok and be like, hey, sunflower oil, really healthy, the oil of the next generation, you'd probably do particularly well. But instead, we're talking about measles and we're talking about beef tallow Steak and Shake fries. That's still French fries. Like we're going to get fatter with the French fries. Maybe let's get some vegetables out there on Fox News. Anyway, sorry, I went off there on a rant.
No, the question is, do you dip the fries in the shake, though? I think is maybe the bigger question. And
yeah,
I don't know.
Fries are healthy. Potatoes are healthy for you, okay? It's what you dip them in that's not.
Hey, we had a story, though, that was about they're pushing people to decorate potatoes for Easter as opposed to eggs this year, which I think is an interesting tactic.
Because of egg prices?
Something different.
Are you serious? Jacob, this goes back, though, to your, like, are consumers willing to pay
opportunity.
We got used to cheap food, just like with egg prices. I mean, a dozen eggs goes to, what was the average, Clinton, at the high? Was it $6, $7?
No, it was like up at $8 or $9.
$8 to $9. Okay. People were losing their ever-loving minds, Jacob, ever-loving minds. And I think that goes back to your point. Like, we got used to cheap food.
They were losing their ever-loving minds, and they were still buying the eggs.
Yeah, well,
like the shelves were still empty because somebody found a buyer for the eggs. And this is a really good example of what I'm talking about, because the US government was sensitive to the egg prices and wanted to do something and talked about relaxing some restrictions so that you could get eggs from other places in other countries. And at that point, if I'm an egg farmer, I'm pissed off because I've been waiting for egg prices to go up probably for years. And now that the market is finally doing what it's supposed to do. Like I have a product, there is a shortage. Like I'm gonna make the last 5 years of losses, I'm going to make it back on this year. And now you're going to allow imports of eggs from South Korea or someplace like that. Like what the heck? Like where is the balance between, okay, either we're going to protect the U.S. farmer or we're not, like, and all you care about is giving cheap eggs to the population. You see right there sort of the policy dissonance where the administration might want one thing and it sounds good, and then they do something else. And to your point, everybody's losing their ever-loving mind and they're trying to respond to the polls rather than being like, well, if we really believe in a market-driven economy, maybe we should just let the market determine itself. But this is something that the U.S. government has never done. I often talk about this example in the context of technology. semiconductors, which, everybody is talking about, and because of Taiwan and its role in the supply chain, we wouldn't be able to record this right now if not for the semiconductors in our computers and things like that. Semiconductors were basically created in the United States in the 1950s, and basically created because the United States government decided that semiconductor companies should survive. If the U.S. government hadn't stepped in and bought massive amounts of the product that the early semiconductor companies were producing, the semiconductor companies probably wouldn't have survived. And the reason the U.S. government wanted semiconductors was because when you put chips on missiles, they're more accurate, and they wanted to win the Cold War. That's the height of the Cold War. We're doing battle with the communist overlords in Moscow, and here is the U.S. government saying, we're going to be communist about semiconductors. We're going to make sure a U.S. semiconductor industry stands up, which goes back to your question earlier, Tyne. Can we fix this? Yes, but the U.S. government has to decide it wants to fix it. It has to say, okay, enough of the market-driven ideological nonsense. It hasn't been a perfectly market-driven economy at any point in the last 30 years, and it's certainly not so now with our imposition of these tariffs. You know what? We need food security in this country. Okay, here's a full government Operation Warp Speed type effort to make sure that there's a sustainable way to do that. Like I mentioned ships earlier. We're supposed to be the most powerful Navy in the world. We build like 1% to 2% of the ships that are produced in the world every single year. That is a huge geopolitical threat. We probably should protect the U.S. shipbuilding industry and have massive whole government effort to make sure that we can build ships in this country. Are we doing that? No. We're talking about slashing spending, but tariffs is going to make everything okay. So like we absolutely can figure our way out of these things. And this is one of the things I often say to audiences, like, don't be so doom and gloom. And apologies to y'all because y'all are also in the media, but like I know that negative clicks allow people to stay on it longer and more attention and things like that. But there are no problems the United States has that it can't figure out on its own. And there are actually very few countries in the world that have the resources that they need to overcome their problems. So do we have problems? Yes. Are we going about it in a typically demented point of view, as often happens in democracies where everybody's yelling at each other? Yes. But like we have the resources if we want to fix these things. My general point, though, is one of the reasons I think there's this dissonance is because the things that you're seeing out of Washington, it's not going to fix them. Maybe they've put their finger on the problem correctly, and maybe they even have sort of half of the right strategy. But the tactics they are using right now, they are going to blow up in their face. And unfortunately, farmers are at the front line of that because y'all are exporting to foreign markets. And when countries are thinking about how to retaliate to what they are seeing out of the White House, they're coming for you first. They know that you're the weak point in the United States economy. And it's you and the energy guys who are going to feel it first because you're the ones who are exporting the commodities.
Before we get to what the Sigma, to wrap this up, there's some confusion. Even we're talking kind of a day after President Trump announced the tariffs, and there's some confusion. We have a 34% tariff on China. Is that in addition to the 20% tariff that's already there? So it's actually this 54%. It says USMCA products covered under USMCA are excluded, but can we get a list of those products? There's just, Jacob, some confusion this morning. But as we look at kind of everything that's been announced and the strategy that the Trump administration is using so far on tariffs and trade, what do you think is the biggest unintended consequence? Because anytime we see a decision out of Washington, there is an unintended consequence. And what are you concerned is the biggest when it comes to ag?
Yeah, I think the unintended consequence is that I think this particular White House has a greater estimation of U.S. power than maybe the U.S. has. I don't think U.S. power is in decline by any means, but I think U.S. power relative to some other countries like China or even like the European Union, Brazil, has declined. So those countries have gotten stronger and more capable, and we have sort of maybe stayed in place or only increased our power a little bit. And when you put all of those net effects on top of each other, that relative power has declined. And I think the Trump administration is thinking that the United States is still enjoying the unipolar moment, that it's still the most powerful country in the world, and everyone is going to bend the knee now that we've stopped being nice and we've taken out the tariff stick. And that will be the case for some countries. We saw this with Colombia, for example, when the Trump administration got into a spat over illegal migrants with Colombia, immediately threatened tariffs. The Colombians backed down. The Trump administration declared victory. So some countries are just going to have to fall in line because they're not going to have a choice. And that includes our Canadian and Mexican neighbors and friends, I would call them. I don't know if the White House would still call them that. But the unintended consequence is that some of these other countries are not going to bend the knee. And they are going to be willing to experience some short-term pain of their own so that they become less dependent on the United States. So by doing the Trump administration, by doing this, for example, the European Union was squabbling amongst itself, couldn't figure anything out, didn't have any sort of policy coherence going forward. That has changed. I think when we look back at 2025, the most important thing that we will say, that historians will say happened in 2025, was that Germany woke up because they were responding to the US government and these tariffs, and Germany decided that it could no longer rely on the United States and it needed to double down on fixing the problems of the European Union and becoming stronger. And that will include self-sufficiency when it comes to ag. European ag had been in decline because the EU was talking about all these different, things were bad in the Biden administration for things like carbon and green rules. I mean, just look at the green regulations that the EU tried to put through in the last couple of years. That's all going to go away because the EU is going to realize, okay, we need to be a competitor to the United States in a multipolar world, not trust our security to this entity that is going to treat us this way with tariffs. It's going to increase urgency in places like China, like India, like Brazil, to either get closer to food self-sufficiency or to boost their own markets when it comes to these things to compete with the United States on a broader level. So I think the unintended consequence is the United States is behaving like it's the strongest power in the room. And by the way, the last time that we really saw policy like this, the United States was arguably one of, if not the rising power in the room. President Trump likes to talk about William McKinley all the time, who himself was also a tariff man. The difference between now and then is that we were the upcoming manufacturing superpower. We were the ones that could fight wars in the Atlantic and the Pacific, the world wars, and win them both. We're not sort of in that situation anymore. Honestly, the country that looks most like the United States when William McKinley was slapping tariffs on other countries is China. They're the ones who are the manufacturing powerhouse. They're the ones that are rapidly building a modern Navy and have all of this shipbuilding capacity. So there's this mismatch here. And I think by pushing some leverage that we have, you've actually burned the leverage. Tariffs had their greatest efficacy as a threat. Once you pull the lever, you pulled the lever, and now all these countries are going to react. A good example of what I'm talking about, think about the Chinese telecom firm Huawei. This was a company that the Trump administration went after during its first administration because they were worried about Huawei equipment and all of the telecoms networks all over the world. They didn't want the Chinese to be able to spy on the United States. And the United States thought that if it put a bunch of sanctions and things like that on Huawei, it would basically kill the company. And it did for a couple of years. Huawei went through a couple of years of a lot of pain. And last year, all of a sudden, they were putting out their own phones again with their own either custom-made chips or chips that they got from somewhere else. And now they're out there competing at the same level that they were before. So maybe you use this short-term leverage to get some short-term gains, but you're also creating the impetus for these competitors to take the short-term pain to become even bigger competitors for you in the long run.
Yeah, interesting. Jacob, before we run out of time, we're going to jump over to What the Sigma and talk about some of the craziest headlines we saw this week. Go for it, Tyne.
Okay, well, so mine's one that will be on the show this weekend. But Jacob, I kind of took a deep dive this weekend into the somber situation with cotton. It's not good. It's not good anywhere in agriculture when it comes to the row crop side. There's a lot of pain, but when you look at operations, especially young operations that are going under, it's cotton farmers. So things aren't good. So I did an interview with the National Cotton Council. I did an interview with some growers who really, there's Southerners can really paint a colorful picture. They do that very well, as you know, Jacob. And so I had some interesting quotes, but I talked to Gary Adams, who's the president and CEO of the National Cotton Council. And we talked, 85% of the cotton that we grow here in the U.S. is exported. So we, in the cotton industry, you look at tariffs, you look at retaliatory tariffs. I mean, we are very vulnerable to that. But one thing that I asked him about was domestics. Like, why don't we mill more cotton here in the U.S.? He said in the last 20 years, we have seen domestic usage for cotton fall 75%. Clinton, that is massive. Domestic usage for cotton has fallen 75%. And so there is this war on cotton right now, and it's the synthetic man-made fibers. And so you think of Lululemon, you think of all of these, your Lululemon joggers, Clinton, that you wear all the time.
No.
Those are not made of cotton. And so I asked what can be done. And I asked the grower this, and he said, buy more cotton, pay attention to the labels, buy more cotton. But the reason I bring this up, Jacob, is you look at an industry that could possibly benefit from President Trump's America First policy. And so what Gary Adams told me, there's a couple things that need to happen short term. And one of that is he could not stress enough the need for a farm bill. Like you look at a farm bill that is out of date, it is just not working for cotton. But longer term, he said that they're trying to maybe introduce some legislation to give tax breaks to those who use cotton domestically and mill cotton domestically. And can that be a way to kind of rejuvenate the domestic cotton industry? So Jacob, do you think that maybe we will have more of these commodity organizations push for that? I mean, we've been so concerned on the export side. It's exports, demands. It's kind of a lot been in that basket. Do you think we will have this push for tax breaks and things to use our own product here at home?
I think, yes, I absolutely think that they will make that argument. The question is whether that argument is going to fall on listening ears in Washington. And it seems to me those ears are going to be deaf. And, Trump leaked this week to Politico, maybe because he wanted to balance the market reaction that was coming with tariffs, that Elon Musk might be on his way out. So maybe that's your first real signal that the Trump administration, okay, we did the cuts. Now we know that we need to support the American economy. If you look at deficit spending, for example, like the Trump administration, the first time around blew out deficit spending. They'll probably blow out deficit spending again, and maybe they'll be willing to listen at this point. But here today, like if I was a commodity group going to Washington, why would I expect them to do anything to help me at all? They're slashing budgets across all over the place because they want to bring spending into some kind of invented rationale in their minds. I'm actually more worried about what happens when Elon discovers crop insurance. Like, is he going to think that that is such a good idea? What's going to happen when Elon discovers ethanol subsidies? You think that's going to comport with what his view of how the U.S. economy should work? So as long as Elon is there, as long as the Department of Government Efficiency is running things, as long as you've got top Trump lieutenants who are saying, hey, we got to cut spending, we can't be doing these things, I don't see that there's going to be any money for these people who are going to be coming hat in hand. But you've got it exactly on the point. If you're going to do all of these things, there's going to have to be support, or there's going to be massive pain. And that's true it's true for all of these different guys across the board.
Real quick, what the segment from this week, and Tyne, you did a story last weekend on YouTube. It's over 24,000 views, talking about whether or not agriculture is in a recession. And Jacob, if you look at kind of the classical signs of where we sit today, what's your take on whether or not agriculture is in the middle of it? I mean, we've heard of layoffs. There's companies pulling back. Earnings reports aren't exactly great. Projected farm income, once you get past cattle, hasn't really looked great at all, especially on the crop side of things. What's your thoughts on that?
It's a difficult time. Farmers have been particularly glum in all the events I've done. There's only one. I did an event with some pulse growers in Idaho back in December. They were very happy because lentils and chickpeas and all these other things doing a brisk business there. It's mostly exporting to India and sort of other places like that at least were outside of the eye of Sauron, the China trade war and the Mexico sort of Canada trade war. But everybody else, feeling the pain. Not just from tariffs, feeling the pain from increases in labor costs because of how the migration issue is affecting things. Caught in this position where they know they need to innovate. They know, for example, they need to start investing in ag tech that can help with automation because that labor problem is not going away anytime soon. And yet, interest rates are up and nobody now wants to invest in exactly the things they need in order to improve the margins going forward. So whether it's technically a recession, whether it's, I can't actually say that myself, but definitely the mood on the ground has been pretty grim for the last couple of months. But maybe I should have said this in Talking Tea, that it's sort of a story of two economies, because the smaller you get in a room, the smaller the producer is, the more grim the conversation is. And yet people also know that I have this, that my day job is in investing in things like that with the ultra high net worth, affluent folks. And I can't tell you how many people are like, well, hey, here's a small farm that they're trying to roll up into something. Do you have investors who are interested in this? And what about this old seed mill? Could we do something with this that maybe makes fertilizer in the United States if we rejiggered some stuff and blah, blah, blah. So like at that top level, like money is looking for places and looking in ag as a place that is super depressed and where maybe there are opportunities because that grimness is a little bit overstated. So it's really hard if you're that small, even to medium-sized American producer. But if you're at that top level, you're looking around and you're seeing nothing but opportunity. You're seeing people who both on a dollars and cents basis and also more important on sort of their sentiment basis are down in the dumps. And that's usually when people are willing to make bad decisions and offload assets that in a couple of years' time might actually do better. And this is one area too. I think this is also difficult for farmers. Like just look at the land values over the past couple of years. they're going up and to the right. And they're going up and to the right because we are going to blow out the deficit, and because inflation is going to rise, and because the dollar is becoming probably less valuable relative to some of these others. So you've got wealthy folks out there, and even foreign investors, who are snapping up U.S. ag land because they think that's a hedge against inflation. And so ironically, the assets that U.S. farmers are sitting on are worth more than they've ever been worth before. And yet you can't access that cash that you might need to put back into the business. And there are creative ways that you can try and do that. But most farmers are not geared towards that sort of financial engineering. They're geared towards, I got to go milk the cows, or I got to go plant the crops, or I got to go do the work that I need to do, rather than thinking about all the creative ways to do these things. So I danced around your recession question to say, I know sentiment is bad. I don't know if it's technically if we're technically in recession, but sentiment is just about as bad as it's been in my career.
Yeah, and I mean, we survey economists, and the majority of economists are saying yes when you look at the row crop side. Not all when you look at the row crop side of ag. Okay, Jacob, to end things, we've talked about a lot. You look at commodity markets, and it's frustrating if you're a farmer right now staring at commodity markets in the red, hoping that things can recover. But give us a silver lining in all of this. What's the one positive you want to leave us with?
Yeah. Well, first, you mentioned economists. I am not an economist. My favorite joke about economists is you ask an economist what the impact of the French Revolution was on the global economy, and he will tell you it's too soon to tell. So sorry for the economists that are out there.
I love it.
That's funny.
But in any case, the silver lining, I think I sort of already mentioned it, which is I think we're getting an overdose of negative news items, and there are certainly things that are out there that are negative. And honestly, like I hope for the U.S. farmers' sake that this batch of tariffs, like that we at least get to clarity, because I think the problem is actually not the tariffs themselves. They pose unique challenges for different types of commodities depending on what market you're talking about. The problem is the uncertainty. And we have been yanked around so much over the first 3 months of the Trump administration that we haven't really known, well, what's next? And is it really going to be Canada and Mexico? And is it the EU? And what products is it going to be? And like the uncertainty needs to go away. I think once you get sort of certain that, okay, this is what the policy is, this is what I have to adapt to going forward, nobody is better than the U.S. than adapting to the market realities that they have in front of them. And the United States has shown over and over and over again that it can outcompete because its human capital is the best, its technology is still the best. It has these intangible advantages that no other country has, especially when it comes to agricultural fertility, that no other country can claim. But I don't think the U.S. farmer can get to doing that until he or she has some sense of predictability out of Washington. So honestly, I have no silver lining until the White House can sort of get on one page. But once we're there, once we kind of know what the lay of the land is, yes, it might be like change is difficult, but there are no problems that I see here that are insurmountable. No. And I think that, unlike, farmers in some other parts of the world, like if you're a European farmer thinking about how you're going to compete with EU regulations and all the things, you're screwed. Look at what's happening in New Zealand with their dairy industry. Like you poke around the world, there's a lot of negative stories. We have the resources we need. We just need like some coherence, and we need to all get on the same page. Not going to be easy, but hey, at least it's possible. It's not impossible like it is in some of these other markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob, thank you so much for your insights and taking time to be with us today and share some of your thoughts. I know you've made the rounds this winter and spoke to a lot of folks, but we appreciate you sharing a few of those things with our audience today, and always appreciate a good Lord of the Ring, Eye of Sauron reference in the middle of the podcast. That's strong. That's showing up strong today. So thank you very much.
I had one friend who we haven't been doing it lately, but maybe I should bring it back. We compete with each other in interviews to see who can very slyly put a fish lyric into the conversation. And you have to
bring it back. You got to bring it back. Yeah, Jacob, we know you have to hop. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, fascinating.
All right, that's awesome. Well, interesting
viewpoint.
Love
it. Different viewpoint.
And it's really all about perspective, right? And I think he does a really good job of that, of just looking at agriculture from a different lens and saying, hey, none of this is insurmountable. Like we can figure all of this stuff out. We just need to get all on the same page. And I think that's a really strong message.
Provide a little certainty. Yeah, I liked that point. And when we go out and we talk to farmers right now, not everyone's on the same page, Clinton. There are ones that are very against this use of tariffs, very against saying, this is going against everything that our trade policy and some of our commodity organizations, what we've been founded on. And, we've worked so hard to build up this demand, and now we're seeing it kind of slip through our hands. And so you have farmers that are in that camp saying this is unneeded pain. Then you have other farmers who are saying, listen, we have a record ag trade deficit right now. Something has to change. We have got to do something. And if somebody doesn't do something now, we're going to continue to see that deficit grow. And so, Clinton, really, I mean, you have farmers really on both sides of the aisle. And these are farmers that probably voted for Trump. You know, I had one farmer this week tell me, I voted for President Trump. This is one part I don't like. I did not vote for the tariffs, even though I knew this was a possibility. I voted for him to get the economy back on chat and or back on track and all of that. I didn't, the tariffs, this is what I don't love. And so I get it. There's mixed emotions out there in farm country, and there's nervousness. And so we'll try to navigate this. But on a more positive personal note.
Oh, yes.
Colton's playing baseball. It is spring. The sun is shining. How is baseball doing?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. It's basically been rained out and snowed out every day so far. So
snow?
So tonight is supposed to be the first game. So we'll see. We had a scrimmage, went well, but now we're off and running with the team. So we should have hopefully a game. They're supposed to play this weekend, but I don't know. It's supposed to be like a once in a generation storm. So I'm not sure they're actually going to get to play this weekend.
We didn't even get into that. I mean, we're talking like 10 inches of rain.
Crazy.
Farmers in the Mid-South and the South are very concerned about the seed that's already in the ground. We'll see what's happening. But it does look like warmer weather's on the way. And so I'm talking to a lot of farmers in the Midwest who think they will get started planting possibly next week if things dry up, if they're not in that bullseye of that 10 inches to even 15 inches. I mean, it's been crazy. But Clinton, this week, the tornadoes that have hit Michigan have hit, Arkansas had a massive tornado Wednesday night. So it's been a very active weather pattern.
Yeah, my family made me watch the movie Twisters during the storms last night, which was a fun experience.
Why would you do that?
It was a fun experience. Not a bad flick. I recommend it. There's a few callbacks in my old stomping days there at, you may remember OSU.
I do remember. I kind of got a OSU orange. I've added another job to the list. I'm really good at finding jobs that don't pay. Is what I've realized. Like that may be my calling in life, is finding jobs that don't pay. Anyway, next week is prom.
Did you get asked? Was there did James do a promposal?
To DJ. So I am DJing our prom. And I told them, I said, listen, I don't know if this is a good idea. I don't even have equipment to DJ, right? That's not, I can officiate a wedding. I don't have the equipment to DJ. Anyway, and he said.
But you have the rhythm to DJ, Tyne.
Well, no, they said, but Tyne, you help make it an experience. So we're going to play games. Apparently last year they didn't dance much, so we're going to play games. But after next weekend, I guess you can hire me because I need to
put that on your resume.
I need to
your
find
resume is getting
money.
really long. Yeah.
If you want to hire me for your DJ at your next event, just contact my people, which I don't have. But
DJ Jazzy Tyne. All right. Good. We're going to change your super next week. You have a different title.
Well, Tyne-O-Mite is my nickname, and I feel like that is a really good DJ name. So
it's strong.
Better than Tyne Tallahassee.
We expect a couple of pictures and maybe some videos of a dance-off.
I'm not dancing.
For the next Unscripted, just so people know.
I will. I'm going to do dance contests. I'm not dancing because
No. A dance contest. You got to be in the middle of it if you're going to do it.
No, I will school everyone. I would win. So we're not. I'm not going to.
You got to pull a muscle is what you're going to do.
Just wait till my TikTok gets started. It's going to be fire.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for being with us on Unscripted. Of course, we want to thank our sponsor, BASF, for sponsoring the podcast, as always.
Until next time. See you guys later.
Next time.
Bye.
Live life unscripted.
Thanks for joining us. You can dive into more of Unscripted on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and listen to it anywhere podcasts are found. I'm Clinton Griffiths.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. From all of us here at Farm Journal, keep it real as you live your life unscripted.
Unscripted is a production of Farm Journal Studios, where no one grows alone.